sounds so good. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another vloggy episode. Today we are back in the shed and we are doing some gauge installs. As you can see here, there's 3 gauges sitting on my bench as well as a pillar pod. So today we're going to be installing this. Now, not only are we doing the gauges, but in this box here we have a 3-inch exhaust. Now this is actually the cheapest exhaust I could find, which I'm okay about because I don't really care. It's under the car and you don't see it anyway. But a 3-inch exhaust is going to be absolutely mint because I am sick of driving a car that sounds like a bloody broom. Now, when I say I bought the cheapest exhaust system, I actually mean it. I went online, I researched 3-inch exhaust for a CRD Patrol, and this popped up for $350, and then I would think it was about 50 bucks to get it shipped to my house. So a $400 exhaust, very, very cheap. It is aluminized steel, which means it's not actually a stainless steel, but it still will probably outlast what I want to do with this car anyway. Also went with the satin black finish because I think it's going to look the best under the car. We got all that for 400 bucks. You cannot complain about that. Now, the main reason we are doing this today is because in this dump pipe here, we have a bung for our EGT sensor, which is exhaust gas temperature. So it's very important in a diesel to monitor your EGTs so that your motor doesn't bloody blow up. So now that that's unpackaged anyway, we can start looking at unbolting our factory exhausts. Now, these bolts have been on there for 200,000 K, so this is probably not going to be fun. My only suggestion to you guys is to use a penetrator spray or even WD-40 on the threads. And also, don't use a double hex socket. Don't use double hex sockets like this. You can see that there's twice as many stars in here as something like this. These single hex sockets really don't slip on much, and they don't strip bolts. These things here, they strip bolts all the time, especially exhaust bolts. So stay away from these if you're touching your exhaust, and definitely try and just use single hex sockets like this. Just be careful, all right? That's my tip for the day. So I'm gonna start ripping this bloody exhaust off, and hopefully it doesn't fight me all today because I wanna get it done in a hurry. So let's get into it. Let's get this exhaust going. I can't believe I done that. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I don't really like to admit that I stuff up too often, but this one was freaking huge and it was definitely my fault. I could have avoided it, but I stuffed the aircon line. It is the worst aircon line I could have ever stuffed in my whole life. This heat shield here was on the exhaust manifold and I need to get this off to take off the downpipe. So this was getting jammed in there and I did some research on how to get it out, but I was wiggling that out and this aircon line here actually runs up the side of it and it just was pressing. It actually got wedged in this gap here and it just separated the weld right on that seam there. So that just started pissing out that coolant stuff that's in there. So I was thinking, oh yeah, that's not too bad. I'll just get the aircon line off and go get that little bit welded and we'll be back. But I didn't realize that this piece here joined up to this piece here, and that runs over the chassis rail, and to get this off you either got to take the motor out or you got to lift the body off the chassis to give you enough room to slide it over the chassis. The worst thing actually is now that I can't move the Patrol because all the boost lines and stuff are pulled off, it won't even drive. Can't even put the exhaust back on because then I can't get the aircon line back down the firewall. I just spent like 3 hours trying to sort that out, and anyway, I don't want to talk about it any longer. I'm going to go inside. I'm going to hopefully get that fixed tomorrow. I'll see you guys if I did. If not, I'll probably continue this on next weekend. Hopefully I can get that fixed by then. That would be bloody great. We can get this dog on the road and get the gauges in. So catch you guys. Right, we are back. Yesterday was a prick of a day.
The next day.
I've called an aircon guy, he's gonna come out and look at it. We're gonna actually make completely custom lines and just do away with that aluminium pipe altogether. Unless he actually can figure out a way to make it work, I don't know, I'm gonna leave that up to him. Now where we left off is I had the down pipe unbolted and I pulled the aircon line out completely. So what I've done today is I've just gone ahead and I've fitted the down pipe. Now there was actually one really damaged stud, so I did have to make a new stud and put it in. I don't know if you guys can see too much down there, but you can see right there, it actually bolts back onto the turbo, and that's where our EGT probe will go. Now, what's left to do is bolt the rest of this exhaust system in. So all we have to do is basically meet every flange, put a gasket in, put some bolts in, and hang this up. This is actually not going to take long at all, but it is going to be really hard to film. So I'm going to quickly bowl this out, stick it in, and then I'll talk to you guys after I've got it in. Alright, it's been a minute since I've seen you guys last, but the exhaust is in. Now the aircon guy did just come around and we sort of worked out what we're going to do with the line, so I just dropped them off to a welder. So instead of having aluminium tube run over the chassis, we're going to have a little hose like this. Now I'll still be using my main aluminium piece down, but there where it jumps over the chassis, we're going to be using that hose over there. Now the exhaust is all in, and honestly for a cheap exhaust, the fitment was absolutely perfect. Now it's too hard to show you guys under, but it is just a straight pipe the whole way through, so I imagine this is going to be quite loud. So let's hear this thing. I'll pop you guys on the ground, we'll fire it up and give it a little bit of a revvy. Holy crap, that actually sounds so sick. Listen to the bloody turbo. So now that that exhaust is done, we can actually whack our EGT probe in. Which brings me to the main part of this video. Now, gauges are something that every four-wheel drive really should have. Now the gauges I have chosen are boost, EGT, and water temp. Now, in my opinion, those three are the main things that you want to keep an eye on. Obviously, water temp, you don't want your water getting way too hot because you'll cook your motor. Now, exhaust gas is also very similar. It's about keeping temperatures down. Diesels really hate getting too hot. And as for boost, boost is really good to keep an eye on to know whether your car's performing right. You could easily get a spike in your boost, and if you do, you know, it could detonate the motor as well. Obviously, you could go balls to the walls. You could set up, you know, gauges on your dash and stuff like that, and you could do a lot more gauges in there, and more the merrier in a way. But at the same time, I want to keep this build clean and simple. So we are just going to be monitoring those three things, and eventually we'll probably get a trans temp reader in the middle somewhere. But yeah, let's get these in. It's going to be great to be able to monitor stuff, and I also think gauges just look sick, so I'm very keen to get this started. Now we'll walk you guys through a couple of little steps that I like to take, but this is a relatively easy installation. It's just a little bit of wiring here and there, and then obviously installing the sensors themselves. We do have to go through the firewall as well. Alright, so you can see here we've got our three gauges. Now you can actually daisy chain these together, they come with a cord to do that, and then you only have to supply power and ground to these four wires here. Now, as for in the car, the easiest way to get power is normally behind the head unit, so I've pulled the head unit out. In behind there we have illumination, we have ground, we have power, we have battery. So obviously our gauges are going on this pillar here. So what I've done is I've ran trailer plug wire, which is actually 5-core, so this actually has 5 different color wires in it, down under the dash, and it comes up right here. Now, in my opinion, this is a pretty big hack. Now, we only have to run this one sheath wire instead of running 4 separate wires. So I definitely recommend getting trailer plug harness wire to do an installation like this. So what we're going to do now is follow our pin out for our head unit, and we should be able to tap into these wires here, and preferably tap in on the patrol side, not on the head unit side, just in case you were to ever change head units. All right, so we are at this stage of testing the gauges. You can see I've got my 5-core coming in,
and we're tapped into everything we need to be tapped into, as well as up here. I actually managed to color code it quite nicely, except for the green that is going to black, but that kind of makes sense anyway. So they're all wired up and they all go to this plug, which then plugs into the gauges. Now I'm going to test this real quick before we go any further and just make sure that the gauges turn on. Then we can start running all our probes and sensors. All right, here we go. Let's see if these gauges work. Sorry about the beeping as well. But ignition on. They are all working. God, they actually look really, really cool, which is half the reason I got them. That one isn't actually flickering. I don't know why that's doing that. But that looks bloody mint.
So now that they are wired up, we can actually start looking at fitting our sensors in this engine bay. We have boost, we have EGT, and we have water temp.
So this thing here is a little housing for a temperature sensor. So this goes in line of the radiator hose here. Just basically cut the hose, whack that in, face it whichever way you want your sensor to be facing, run the wires out into the cab.
Water is probably going to be the easiest one to do at the moment, so I'm going to do that first. We will lose a little bit of coolant, but if I'm quick enough, we won't lose much.
Right, the temp sensor is in. It actually probably would have been better if this was a 36mm. You can see I had to sort of struggle and push it up a bit, but that is in.
Basically what I want to do is just get all the sensors ready so that we only have to go once through the firewall with all three sensors. So I'm going to try and find a boost source now, then we'll move on to the EGT probe.
You guys probably can't see, but in there is a EGT gauge.
Now, like I said, there was a bung already in the downpipe, and that's why we went that exhaust. As for the boost, it looks like I'm going to have to tap a fitting into our intercooler pipe there. Now, I also did something else that's very, very exciting today, and I want to quickly give you guys a sneak peek. I did sneak off around lunchtime, and I picked this up, and I'm very, very excited to show you guys this, and I can't wait to get it in.
But as you can see on the back of the Triton, we have a massive, massive pallet from our friends at Superior.
So we finally got our suspension in for the Patrol. I'm very excited to get that in, but that's down the way. So this video is going to drag on for the third day, and I'll see you guys soon. Right, so it's been a week since I last seen you guys, and I apologize for not getting a video out, but it's all because of our stuff up with the aircon line. I think I've actually managed to fix it. I still have to fit everything and just make sure it's gonna work. Where we left off is we're just about ready to start plumbing up all these gauges, and I did actually organize a fitting for our boost pipe, so we can get all that done today.
So this is the aircon line that we broke, and we actually cracked it right here. So what I've had a guy TIG it up, and you have to TIG right around the whole thing to fix it. He said he's pressure tested it, and I hope he's done a good job, because if I put this in and it leaks, it's going to cost a shitload more money. Now these fittings here are special Nissan fittings, so if you're going to go destroy an aircon line, just be careful that you don't have special fittings, because it does cost a lot more. Because we couldn't get those fittings, what I've had to do is get -10 welded onto one of those fittings, which is just the piece that we cut off. So that will now screw onto the car, and then we had a -10 fitting welded down here, and then we have this piece of soft line, and that soft line is going to replace the bit that went over the chassis.
So what I need to do is fit this into the car without breaking it again, and then just make sure that this is actually going to work. One of these ends, this end here, isn't actually swaged on yet, so I do need to get a length and have it ready for him to just come back, swage it, fill it up with gas, and hopefully that's all this done.
So after a bit of trouble, I managed to get the aircon line in. You can see it just snaking down, and I've got it back into the firewall there. It's going to be hard for you guys to see, but inside there you can see that the hose is now running over the chassis.
That comes down into our two fittings there, so that is nice and neat. So I'll get the aircon guy out tomorrow and get him to fill that up with gas, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything works out well and it holds gas and we don't have any more leaks. The only thing left to do is boost. So what we're going to do is tap into our boost pipe coming off of our turbo. We're actually going to tap a fitting into the side of it, then we can run a vacuum line off that and into the cabin up to the gauge.
So what I'm thinking with that is straight off the turbo, we come up to our boost pipe, and this is actually just a steel pipe. So I'm going to drill and tap a fitting into the top of that. Then we can run our boost line off to our sensor. I've just gone and got this little barb here to match up, and I'll wax some thread tape on it. We'll screw it in. I've also got a BSP tapered tap here that I borrowed from work.
We'll be doing a front mount intercooler eventually, so this is only sort of a temporary setup, which is why I don't care about just tapping it in. If I was keeping that, I probably would just weld a bung on it and then actually put a fitting into it, but obviously there's no point doing that if we're going to get rid of this cooler anyway.
As you can see here, we've got our water sensor. Now I've put that in just a conduit just to make it a little bit neater. Right here we have our boost sensor. It's just zip tied in. It's probably the best way I could do it. It runs around and meets our EGT probe and boost line, and then that goes around to our sensors over there. They all come up through the firewall up to here, and I've got it all plugged in. I've already gone through the gauges and set the color to red. I then went in and set my over values, which means that like peak boost, I want it to alarm me at 30 PSI. I want the water temp to alarm me at 100, and I want the EGTs to alarm me at 600. So I've gone through, set all that. So let's test them out and see if they work. You can see they're coming on. Oh, and I've got a flat battery. All right, jump packs on. All right, so water temp, 27 is probably normal because that's ambient. Our EGTs are climbing, which is perfect. You can see boost. Alright, so that's great. All our gauges are working, which means it's time to put all the interior back together and then fit our pillar pod. I won't film it, and then we can hopefully take this thing for a drive and hear that new exhaust as well as read our new gauges. So I'm just fitting these gauges to the pillar pod, and this is a very common issue that I see with every single gauge I've ever fitted. When you get a 52mm gauge and a 52mm holder, it doesn't actually hold it. I don't know why that is. It's just always been the case with all my pillar mounts and every other gauge I've ever bought. Is I just get the gauge, get electrical tape, and run it around the outside until it thickens it up enough to sandwich it in there. And that way it'll actually hold it in. I got to keep adding it, but you just do it until it's thick enough to actually grab in and stay in like that. Right, so the gauges are in, and honestly guys, this has got to be one of the nicest full drive interiors going. I think these gauges have honestly just tied the interior in with the Polaris head unit. We've got the throttle controller down the side, got the locker in. This is actually turning out to be my dream interior. So as you can see, we come across the dash and we've got our 3 new gauges in their home in the pillar pods. Now instead of putting the grab handles on, what I did is just painted the bolts black because I actually don't even use that grab handle. I might eventually get like one of those corded ones just to keep it nice and tight so it doesn't interfere with the gauge itself. But honestly, those gauges look so freaking good. Now you can see that they turn on pretty cool, and that is how it's going to look when I'm driving the car. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to have a quick tidy up, then we're going to take this thing for a drive so we can hear the exhaust, and I also want to just check the gauges out a bit. Right, let's take this thing for a drive. I'm going to probably hit up just the industrial area. Gauges seem to be working fine, but we'll keep an eye on them. Sounds so good. Right, so that's it. We have a new 3-inch exhaust, and we also have some monitoring gauges. Let me know what you guys think about the sound of it. Do you think it needs a resonator or not? I'm actually starting to think that it really does need a resonator, but let you guys decide in the comments below. As for the video, probably couldn't have gone any worse, but we managed to get there. I've still got to get the aircon guy out to fix up the last bit of the aircon. But that is working on cars, guys. Sometimes you break shit, sometimes you have a win and it goes easier than planned. But this video is now done. I will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.